Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Future of Jewish podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Hoffman. On this episode, I am joined by Zvika Klein. He is a Jewish world analyst for the Jerusalem Post and is considered one of the world's top journalists specializing in Jewish diaspora affairs. Enjoy my conversation with Zvika Klein. Zvika, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, John. How are you?
I'm good. You are one of the people that there's not a lot of people in the world that do what you do. There's not a lot of people in the Jewish world that do what you do. So I was particularly excited to have you and to have this conversation with you. But before we get into what you're up to today, why don't you talk about where you came from, everything that led up to what you're doing now?
So I'm excited to speak to you because there's not a lot of people in the Jewish world doing what you do, right? So my name is Zvika Klein. I am 39. I live in Efrat in Gush Etzion. I lived in Jerusalem up until half a year ago. I'm married and I have 3 children. And I sound American because I was born in America, but I grew up in Israel. I was very young when we made Aliyah. So I grew up in a settlement. I don't like the word, but settlement called Ginot Shamon. And so on the street, it was like very Anglo-ish. So people spoke English and we called it Hebrewish because we would like mix up, both languages. And there are certain words that don't exist, but exist there. So I grew up, my parents, my family, whatever, is from Chicago. I still say Chicago. But if you ask me like sports questions or whatever, I won't know what to answer. So I served, I went to Hesder Yeshiva. In the army, I was in Dover Tzahal. I established something that I think doesn't exist, definitely closed after a few years after I left, but it was a desk that the idea was to connect to the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox and religious Zionist sectors through their media outlets. Because before then, like, they would maybe approach and ask for specific things, but there wasn't someone that actually understood the mentality of who they are, where they're from, what the differences are between them and also their media outlets that are super fascinating. I'll just give one example is this was in 2003 to 2004. So they had these CDs that they would sell in stores, and it was like it was like a late night TV show. And they sold it in stores and people watched it on their computers. And I had to like explain to these senior officials in the army about it and why I think we should be approaching them and doing stuff, So you guys with the video camera go on Hummers, with the whole thingy there. So that was cool. After that, I was on Shlichut. I was an emissary for the Jewish Agency and for World Bnei Akiva in South Florida. And I think it was kind of like a life changer for me because I always, heard from my parents about, growing up in America. They were members of Bnei Akiva also. So that was what brought them to make Aliyah. So I kind of wanted to be that shaliach and try and do the same. So that was, and it was interesting because you go on shlichut and you're like, I'm going to make everybody make Aliyah. And then you get there and you're like, okay, wait, let's rethink this for a second. And the most difficult part was, I was living in Hollywood, Florida, and I was part of the show there, Young Israel, and I could definitely like see myself getting married and living there and having my kids grow up there. And it was difficult for me because like I was there in order to convince them to leave in a way, right? Like it was a little bit more subtle, obviously, and to teach them about Israel and Zionism. And that was difficult for me because, I never thought that could actually happen, that I would ever think something like that. But it was definitely, an amazing experience. And I came back and I was sure I was going to go to film school, but I wasn't accepted twice. So I started just like working for Jewish organizations, for the WZO, World Zionist Organization, for World Bnei Akiva. I was trying to not do PR because after the army, I felt that like journalism and media was shallow, and I don't know, I wanted away, but then just, I guess, forces stronger than me drew me to, was, also a spokesperson for these organizations, and then for other organizations. I also, before my shlichut, actually, I did Birthright a few times, and that was also definitely like a life-changing experience as an Israeli with American parents. And I would always get on the bus and I would say, "Hi, my name is Zvika. I'm 22 years old, and I made Aliyah when I was 2." And everybody always thought that I said I made Aliyah 2 years ago. And then when I spoke Hebrew, they're like, "How's your Hebrew so good?" And I was like, and then I realized, the accent was misguiding or whatever. But so I worked for different organizations, and then 11 years ago, I was approached by Makor Rishon, then it was a daily, now it's a weekly newspaper, conservative, right-wing, intellectual, and they asked me to establish an international news desk. And I did, and also diaspora related. So I came. I was going to come for 2 years, and that's it, because I didn't at the moment. I didn't think the newspaper was something that I was like, I don't know, I wanted to work specifically that newspaper for 2 years. It ended up, it was 10 and a half years. I was part of this team to establish a news magazine in Hebrew and English. It was, the temporary name was called The Zionist. I don't know what you think about it as a millennial, but it didn't happen. So someone was just like, you just start writing, because if you don't want to be fired, you have to just reinvent yourself. So I did, and then slowly I realized that anyone who speaks languages could do international news, but there was no one doing this Jewish beat that I personally was more connected to and loved, and felt that like it wasn't being told in Hebrew. So for 10 and a half years, I was telling the story of diaspora Jews in Hebrew. The platform changed because it was like different owners, and for a few years it was with Ma'ariv, and I also did a little bit of TV, a little radio, this and that, but like that was the constant kind of, Makor Rishon was the constant place where I was writing, and I was able to, achieve anything I ever dreamed of and even more. And almost 3 months ago, I left Makor Rishon and started working for the Jerusalem Post group, which is larger than people think, but mainly write in English now. And I'm still working on my English, so feel free to, fix it a little. But also for Ma'ariv, which is owned by the same owner, and Walla occasionally. So, and I have a podcast that's on a break. It's called Am Yisrael Live. It's on Galei Tzahal with Nurit Kaneti. It's in Hebrew surprisingly about Jewish diaspora. So that's my story.
Fascinating. So a lot to unpack there. I want to go back to one of the first things you said. Just purely curious. You said that you don't like the word settlement. You grew up in the settlement, so to speak. Just explain to us, if you can, why you don't like that word.
For the same reason I don't like the word diaspora. It just feels like it doesn't really represent what people are thinking. It's like a hilltop and a caravan or a little hut. It's not. And also it's considered like the word is like, I don't know if it's derogatory, but it's not really ever said in a positive way. My parents made Aliyah, as pure Zionists, to a place that the Israeli government, established. I think it was Menachem Begin who actually, established it. The neighborhood I lived in was called it still is called Neve Aliza. So Aliyah is named for Aliza Begin, his wife. And, they saw what they were doing as, they were fulfilling anything they learned in the youth movement. It wasn't like a political statement. But as years go on, and I mean, you had a discussion with this about this issue with Daniel Sokach from the New Israel Front. I agree with you on the fact that these, even though if they weren't established for this, but these settlements, quote unquote, are enabling the IDF and Israel to maintain security within Israel. So whatever, that's, a
So
long answer for a short question.
no, but it's interesting because thank you for plugging. I think it was episode 12 with Daniel Sokach here on the Future of Jewish podcast. But what I'd love to ask you is, you cover the diaspora, the Jewish
Right.
diaspora, which is long and wide. I mean, there's, we say 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So
Right.
you can multiply that by whatever amount in the Jewish
And it's
diaspora.
true everywhere and
Right.
everywhere. Yeah.
And so my question for you is like, it seems to me, I mean, you talked about the negative connotation that the word settlement has. It seems to me that in the diaspora, maybe in the US, maybe among certain progressive liberal groups, that, the world, the idea of the settlement, so to speak, are obviously not well received by many people. And it seems to be a growing number of people outside of Israel, also in Israel, by the way, but let's focus on the diaspora. So you cover these people, and it's sort of your job to bring them to Israel, which is, in my opinion, a super important job. But at the same time, you sort of live this, what we can call personal life, which is in many ways what they don't agree with. Never mind the fact that they might not be educated enough to even have an actual opinion.
Yeah.
So like you're sort of, you have this sort of, I don't want to say contradicting life, but this very interesting like professional life, which is your job to cover them and their thoughts and their experiences and so forth. But then on a personal level, you sort of are living this life that maybe many of them,
lots of them see as negative.
Yeah. So how do
like
you,
the source of all evil?
right?
Right.
So how do you like how does that sit with you?
So first of all, writing for Makor Rishon, it wasn't just a personal thing, it was a professional thing. I was writing for a right-wing Israeli news outlet that, and again, every news outlet has their agenda. I don't believe everyone's got an agenda, whether it, broad or narrow, everyone's got an agenda. And so before I was there was never an interview with a Reform Jew. Okay. Now, and then I actually did an interview not only with Daniel Sokach, but also with the president of the New Israel Fund. Now, I think that's actually to Makor Rishon. I think it's to their, it's a positive thing towards the newspaper that they were actually willing for me to interview. Again, I had to learn my facts, do my homework, something that I'm sure you probably hoped you did a little bit more, before you spoke to Daniel or whatever. But so like, I don't always do so much homework, but I did a lot of homework before I spoke to him because I understood I was representing a very specific, ideology, again, as a journalist. But, I couldn't just ask questions. I had to argue, which is whatever. Anyways, it's part of the game. But I couldn't interview a Reform Jew or the president of New Israel Fund every day. Just like Haaretz won't have positive articles about the settlements every other day. It's like you have a certain ideology that you're promoting. So I had to be very smart. And I think because I was a publicist, maybe, I was able to pitch stories in very creative and different ways. And again, not to convince the readers that they should all become Reform and left-wing, but just to have sort of a dialogue through my conversations, through reading the newspaper and understanding a little bit more about what Jewish life is outside of Israel. Because for most Jews in Israel, diaspora Jewry is anti-Semitism or Aliyah. That's when you're going to hear about diaspora Jews in the Israeli media. If you have relatives, you may know something. There was just this AJC poll survey, the American Jewish Committee, and they surveyed millennials in Israel and in the US. And I think it was about 50% of Israeli millennials saw diaspora Jews as distant relatives. So I mean, the other options were like brothers and sisters, and the other one was first cousins. So like it was further away, it's so so I had to balance between what my editors wanted, and many times they just didn't want anything. But I had to convince them why what I was offering they did want, and also tell the story the way I think it really is. But you can't always tell the story the way it is just because. And again, other even like more mainstream media outlets have their own agenda. When I was writing for Ma'ariv, like I had to bring more like sexy stories and shorter stories and like Judaism in movies and TV and whatever, like in pop culture. You have to know what the platform is, and then according to that, create the content.
But I want to
So
go back
it's
to the
difficult.
settlement question, because to me, the settlement seems like a hot button issue, which in many ways it is, that some people describe it or talk about it as a silver bullet solution, meaning all the Israelis have to do is withdraw and we're good. And I'm just curious, like, if I were to ask you, what's the number one thing? There's many things, but what's the number one thing that you wish more people knew about the settlements, both in Israel and certainly abroad? What would that thing be, for better or for worse?
I think just for instance, both sides just don't know each other. They don't, the progressive side, boasts of being liberal, but I can tell you many times people wouldn't give me an interview because of where I was writing because of the media outlet. Okay, I was living in Jerusalem. Okay, I grew up in stuff. Like I'm not, and anyone who knows me knows I'm not extreme to any side. I try and give the person in front of me, the ability to say what they want to say. Right. I'm not putting. I don't. They'll build. I mean, again, there may be like one or two, but like I don't think anyone that I interviewed ever felt that I kind of manipulated them. And so I feel like they wouldn't let me interview them, mainly in the U.S., but not only in the U.S. And also like there's all these delegations of like left-wing organizations, and they may go visit the settlement, and they may not, but like they don't have a friend or someone that they actually know that lives here, and it's the same, the opposite. Like the Israelis. There's all these delegations now of like these reverse birthrights, and I was involved in part of them through the president's office, the former president Rivlin, and all these opinion leaders went on these reverse birthright trips, and they, just like you were on birthright, and it was like wow and whatever. So you actually like made a life-changing, step, but most people don't do that immediately or whatever, right? So they come back, and it's like I say, it's like going to the zoo, right? When Americans come to Israel, they're like, oh, we went to the Haredim, we went to this, we went to that, but like they didn't come back with an Israeli friend. And I think that's what we need. Like we need, because I think if and I think both sides, again, like the right wing or like I would say like the Likud type, but not only, also Haredim, obviously in Israel, they see American Jewry as like, they're all reformed, they're all the new Israel Front, they're all anti-Israel. That's what their Judaism is, Tikkun Olam, right? Just like you spoke with Daniel Sokach. So like that's what they see, and the problem is like everything in life is complex, but it's very difficult to portray something through the media in a very complex way. So there needs to be more. I wish they would just meet. I don't know what, whatever they want to think, they could think, but I just wish they had, like, I have friends who are Reform Jews, and we may even laugh at each other and make fun of each other, but it's not from a condescending place, and it's not me saying all the truth is on my side, because it's not. So
I totally agree with you. I mean, the lack of dialogue and sort of these people put themselves into these echo chambers through social media, through their friends and families, and abroad through their synagogues and JCCs and so forth. And it just reinforces the same old stuff. And unfortunately, one of the things that people don't realize about Netflix is that they really started this revolution, not in information sharing, but in entertainment sharing, meaning long form content, right? Like, you can now go and watch content about the Indian culture, about different places in the world, and all of a sudden, you don't have a full understanding of that culture, of that country, of that people, but at the same time, you have a lot more depth and context and nuance, and you walk away saying, more complicated than I thought it was,
Mhm.
more complexity in a place where I thought there was simplicity. And I think it even, in some cases, will compel you to want to learn more, to gain more knowledge and information and perspective about whatever the subject is. I think Israel, by the way, has completely missed the boat on long form content.
Mhm.
One of the reasons why I started Izzy, but when I say Israel, I mean, at the end of the day, the best content, quote unquote, that comes out of Israel is Fauda, Israeli-Palestinian conflict,
Right.
Shtiso, extreme religion, um, unorthodox is more Jewish, but still somehow connected to Israel as the Jewish state, extreme religion. Tehran, more
Yeah, but it's
conflict.
like also like, anyone Jewish like is annoyed with unorthodox, right? Like with the whatever my unorthodox life, whatever it's called.
Right.
The
And so right.
yeah,
But I'm just saying in general, like the content that's associated with Israel, uh, uh Shad Nechila, which in English is well, I don't remember do you remember the name of the English title?
no, no, no. But it's like one of the
Um,
wars. It's like
right.
Yom Kippur War
Yeah.
or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah. So that was on, I believe, HBO.
really.
So again, it's like this sort of negative um connotations.
Right,
And one of the things that I would love to do, maybe I'll do it with you, is with Izzy, is to go and just show people the real deal, right? And to show
right,
the good, the bad, and the ugly, not just the good. Like you talked about birthright and reverse birthright, um, but really just show the full 360-degree picture, and trust that most people who watch it won't go too far left or too far right, so to speak, but will somehow find themselves in the middle where they're saying, okay, I agree with some of this, I disagree with some of it. And I also want to withhold my opinion about a lot of it because it's just so nuanced and complex.
just like you could watch like a Polish comedy, right?
Right.
Or like a Slovakian, I don't know, soap opera.
No, that's exactly right. So I want to zoom out a little bit because we talked about, the
I
settlements.
just want to add, we need the same thing on the opposite side because like there are like occasionally, like for instance, Srugim, Srugim.
Of course, we have it
So
on
actually, Lady
Izzy.
Shapiro,
Yeah.
who created it, grew up in my neighborhood, and so but there was a character that was like for a minute or two. It was this American girl who brought her tefillin to this guy who stayed over by this girl and didn't have his tefillin. So they're like, oh, Amy or whatever her name is, the neighbor, she has it. And he was like, I don't want to wear her, like that was how whatever. But there's like a Facebook group of bring her back to Srugim. But we don't know anything about diaspora Jews. I'm saying, like, forget about like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and assimilation, right? Which is, it's a big deal, okay? But there are amazing things going on. I said if I could take any like educator to see a Jewish sleepaway camp from any stream, from any, they would be overwhelmed, right? Like, so there are positive things to see outside of Israel when it comes to the Jewish community, but we need Izzy to create
But
movies and
so by the
TV
way,
shows.
we have Surgim on Izzy.
Okay.
And you and I should talk personally off the record about maybe some content because it sounds like there's some synergy. But
You have my number.
I want to exactly. So I want to zoom out uh, and not just talk about the whole settlements and sort of the rest of Israel and how people perceive it, but zoom out to the standpoint of like Israeli Jews versus diaspora Jews. And it seems to me in Israel that, I mean, thankfully, people like yourself cover it and bring it to the Israeli public, but there's not too many of you from my understanding. And so, like, what are some of the things that you feel the Israeli public just gets completely wrong or misguided about diaspora Jews?
Well, first of all, they don't usually think about them, right? Like it's not, like if you're a diaspora Jew, so like if you're Orthodox, then you pray, 3 times a day. It's in your prayers, and like you're going to Israel for a year or stuff like that, right? Or if you're conservative Jew, so like Zionism is the core part of your identity. Or if you go to sleepaway camp, right? Like Ramah, you can't escape Israel there. It's everywhere. All the signs are in Hebrew. So by us, in Israel, like it's just not there. Like you learn about the diaspora in history when you learn about the Holocaust. You're not learning about contemporary Jewish life. So what don't they get? They don't get the Jews outside of Israel actually, invest in being Jewish, which is something that secular Israelis, again, I'm speaking very broad terms. So secular Israelis don't usually or feel the need to do, right? They're like, I'm Jewish, it's in the air. And I love it how like people make Aliyah and they take a picture of the bus with the sign on top that's like the digital like numbers it says, and so instead of the numbers or whatever it says Shana Tova or Chag Sameach, they love it because it's like it's in the air, I think if you're from New York, you're probably not as excited, but so that's one thing. There's this saying that all these Israeli shlichim say when they go on shlichut or even on relocation, they say Yatzati Israeli, Chazarti Yehudi. I went out on shlichut as an Israeli and I came back as a Jew, and it drives me nuts and I hate it. Like it's interesting, like sociologically, whatever, but it's just annoying because we live in the freaking Jewish state, right? So there's a problem here that they don't feel Jewish when they're in Israel, and they only feel it when they leave Israel. They don't. What else don't they don't understand or know? Yeah.
I want to ask you about that thought though, because it's really interesting. My experience living in Tel Aviv, which is as secular as it gets, is a lot of my friends and girls that I date are kind of the Israelis that you just described. And I find myself sort of projecting on them my pride of being Jewish and how it's not something to be taken for granted.
And it's weird for them, right?
It's weird in the beginning because it's like, who is this American Oleh Hadash, this new immigrant? But then eventually they're like, wait, like my last girlfriend was like, you make being Jewish cool. Like before, and this is what I wanted to ask you, is that to me it feels like,
and then she's like, it's too cool for me, but
no,
for
that
lefich, really
like
cool.
to the contrary, she was like, no, tell me more, like I want to learn more. And so I would we would talk about it and she was into it. But the thing that I think, this gets into a different part of the conversation, but I would just be curious to hear your thoughts, is that I think a lot of again, generalization, a lot of secular Israeli Jews feel that the Orthodox and so-called ultra-Orthodox have a stranglehold on Israel as a country and as a place. And so, I think they feel like it's like, well, either I have to be, Orthodox because that's the law of the land, literally, or, if I don't want to sign up for that, then I'm going to sort of be on the opposite end of the spectrum, which is secular. And I'm just curious, like, is that, because to me, it feels like there's a middle ground. It feels like maybe we do need some reforms in the state of Israel that maybe once upon a time made sense, but maybe today don't make sense or don't represent the so-called majority. And at the same time, I think there's a lot of beautiful things about having, religion and state come together. Not in everything, and again, to me, there has to be some middle ground,
right?
But like, it's a really beautiful, like the thing that really pisses me off, and now I'm going off on a tangent, is that uh, Americans and other people in the world, but mainly Americans, try to impose their values on other places in the world. And I've said
Right.
this in previous podcasts, it's nothing new. This idea of separation between church and state is an American thing, and it could exist in other places in the world, by the
Well, I
way.
mean,
But
it's
like, just
also an
because,
American thing, but like European,
right,
probably again, I'm not an expert in history, but I think maybe even before, France is a big, into separation, total separation.
exactly, and that's fine. And what I say to Israelis, by the way, and this is not a nice thing to say, but I'm going to say it here, is like, if you want a country that has a separation between church and state, and go to move to that country. Like,
Right,
in today's day and age, that's possible. And their whole thing is, don't tell me where to live. Well, I'm
right,
not telling you where to live, but you didn't found the state of Israel. Like, this is my frustration, is that, and we see this with people all over the world, not just with young Israelis, is that they think history started when they were born.
mm,
And it's like, Israel was set up as a Jewish state. Now, it's true that the very religious people in this country have what I would call a disproportionate impact and influence on laws and different aspects of the state of Israel.
right,
But at the same time, like, it was set up as a Jewish state. So if you don't
right.
want to live in a Jewish state, you don't have to. But don't try to change the Jewish state to a non-Jewish state.
And how do they respond when you say that?
Don't tell me where to live. This is my country. And I'm saying, no, it's not your country. Like, you're a citizen, but it's not your country. You didn't found the country.
Right?
And so to me, it's like, and it is a very chutzpah thing to tell for an
Yeah.
Oleh Chadash like me, to tell an
Like,
Israeli,
who are you?
exactly.
היית
Yeah,
בצבא.
biduk.
לא רצו אותי.
But, and now we got into a tangent and stuff. But I guess my question for you is like, um, you know, I, I guess what I want to know from you is like, how do we create I think you're doing a lot of the work, but how do we elevate this sort of bridge that you've created between the diaspora Jews and the Israeli Jews, and also the Israeli Jews on the left to the Israeli Jews on the right? Like, how do we create these bridges in your mind so that
Right.
more people can sort of meet in the center? And like you said, sometimes you'll laugh at each other and say, that's kind of ridiculous, but at least you'll appreciate and respect the other to the point where you're not trying to, um, drive them into the sea, in a very extreme way of putting it.
Yeah. So I'll give you two examples that I was thinking on, and happy to hear what your thoughts are. So I mean, one of them is totally like in my field, where pretty much when I stopped working from a Korishon, so there was no one doing covering diaspora full time in Hebrew for an Israeli, for an outlet in Israel, because I mainly read in English now. And it was ideologically, like for me, it was difficult to say, okay, like I'm putting this, on hold. I have the ability to write for Ma'ariv and Walla and whatever, but like my day job is the Jerusalem Post. And so, I feel that like there's a need for more. I even wrote like a whole program. I wrote a one pager with a budget and everything of like, this is how you can. I wrote an op-ed for the Jerusalem Post about how we can, you need someone on TV every day, just like, I mean, like Sivan Rav Meir, who's on TV, and she's a Haredi-ish, modern Haredi woman who's been on TV for, let's say, 15 years, maybe almost every day. Like, the fact that she's there makes a change, but it's got to be consistent. It's got to be every day. Like, there's a TV show called The New Jew, I think, Ayudia Chadash, Guri Alfi. It's great. It was funny. I think it was good. I even got a thanks on the credits there, so that's my claim to fame. But it's 4 episodes. They aired it in 2 weeks. That doesn't leave enough time for discussion. I think the monologues there were amazing, like really, really amazing. He's a funny guy, and I think Dafka, like, the less funny parts were better, just because he was talking from like his gut, from his kishki, so we need like that constant. So I wrote this whole thing about like how with philanthropic money, we could get media outlets to understand why that they if they take someone, so to do this, or even part-time, like it won't it will also, they'll get some sort of like a stipend for, I don't know, something like that. But also, I think also just like financially, if you're covering the diaspora and you actually like collaborate, there's a real financial, edge and opportunities here. So that's the one thing. Second is, which is down your lane, is culture, right? You were mentioning. So like one thing I was interesting, a friend of mine wanted me to speak. He does PR for this philanthropist, a really old guy, really nice guy, lives in New York. I don't remember his name. And he's into like Jewish culture. This guy, he said, if there's one thing I could do to like get Israelis more connected to Judaism, it wasn't necessarily to diaspora, but I think that it's the same thing. And I said, like, wouldn't it be amazing if we had like music, like big, like top, Israeli and Jewish American or Jewish, international, like give these like sums of money, like, subsidize a clip, or if someone creates a song about, create the agenda, make it like sexy in a way that people will want to be, stand in line and want to get this, I don't know, a sum of money to create, I don't know, some Jewish content. So I think the same thing is also with movies and TV. And it's funny. I worked for a year with the president's office, and all these like philanthropists come all the time and like pitch these ideas. Unfortunately, most of them didn't happen, but like one of these like brainstorms that we had, and there was this really smart woman that I she's a very good friend of mine, and she's like, you know what? Forget about all these, all this bullshit and all these programs. We need a Netflix series. That's what we need. Like we need a Netflix series about a diaspora Jewish something, right? Whether it's a family, whether I don't know what. Because in Israeli culture, like here and there will pop up. Like there was Eretz Nehederet, the Israeli Saturday Night Live. So years ago they had a thingy about birthright. Years later, I found out that actually Birthright funded it, which is an amazing, creative idea. But like it was this like jappy Jewish American with a credit card, and everywhere she went, she wanted to, I don't know if you see it. She wanted to swipe the card, right? Yad Vashem, this and that, and it was like a whole. And there was a Brazilian guy who was like very into the girls and very slick and I don't know, sleazy type. So I don't know, that's
Yeah, media. I mean, there's no question that media, but I think the key word that you used is consistency. I mean, one-off media like this Netflix series, not to pity patty this woman's idea, but like one-off is one-off. And if you don't have something consistent, I think when you do have something consistent, then the one-off stuff becomes elevated because, on a basic level, you have the consistency. And then,
right.
It's like in baseball terms, you hit a single, you hit a double, you hit a single, you hit a double, and then every so often you hit a home run. I think, that same approach we have to take, where if you just try to hit home runs all the time, you end up striking out a lot.
Right.
But if you get on base consistently, and then sometimes you hit a home run, all of a sudden, that becomes impactful. And the times that you don't hit a home run, at least you're still getting on base.
Right. So I have to, just a thought that I had was, it relates to your question. So like, I'll give you examples of stories that I published that people just loved, in Hebrew. So like, I was just telling this group of young entrepreneurs in Tel Aviv, actually, who they're on this Jewish agency and Ruderman Family Foundation. This group, they were on Shlichut, and they have this like program where they're trying to create these initiatives promoting American Jewry in Israel. So I said, I gave them examples of stories, right? So I said, every few months I'll go into, I have like my searches, right? Like you have your newsletter and you send out these stories, right? So I have my searches to find stories in languages, and it's a whole thingy. And every few months I'll go into Vogue, okay? And I'll write Jewish. And there was a story about this guy who's a really cool guy. He's a Chabad rabbi, Chassid, whatever, and he's a fashion designer, but like bespoke suits, really like cool and expensive, and he's got these top clients and whatever. And a friend of mine, the Shachar, my friend Shachar, who lives in New York, he took pictures of him. He's a great photographer, and Shachar Azran, and it was a cover story for the Culture magazine in Makor Rishon, of beautiful photos of this Chabad Chassid with this like burgundy suit, and like the whole, and with the New York skyline, and it was followed up by TV, radio, websites, just because it's a cool story. It's interesting. And again, like me as someone who tries to educate, like I see many elements there that are important. It's complex, the complexity or whatever the word is of life, Jewish life outside of Israel, right? He's Haredi, but he's working and he's creative, but he's only doing it for men. He's not doing something against his ideology, but he's stories like that are just cool, and it's real. No one invented this. It's a real thing. So stories like that are just interesting, and I tell people are like, we don't I don't know, like a TV or a radio show, like there isn't enough news in diaspora for every week. I'm like, there's enough for every day. There's half the Jews are living outside of Israel. There are stories. There are
Absolutely.
So,
I want to ask you about that because you use the term American Jewish diaspora, and I have this sort of theory. It's in its infancy, but I'm curious your thoughts about we break up the diaspora into these geographical segments. So we have the American Jewish, and we have the Canadian, and we have the South American, and we have the Australian, and we have the European, the British, the French, the Russian. And it seems to me, not that we would want to group them together all the time, because sometimes it does make sense based on just population numbers to differentiate between certain groups of diaspora. But then at the same time, it feels, because you mentioned media, and like there's there's more than me, that there's a few media outlets that are dedicated to Jewish Americans in the States. But then my feeling is like, if you're only serving the American Jewish diaspora, then we're not creating what I believe are important bridges between the entire diaspora, right, and then between the entire diaspora to Israel and vice versa. And so, like, do you think it's, I don't know if the word's responsible, but do you think it's correct or smart to group the diaspora into these different like subsections? To me, it seems a bit countereffective.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a culture and a geographical thing, and it's a good question because, like, you mentioned Europe, like for instance France, right? So France is the second largest Jewish community outside of Israel, but it's like they're not reading Tablet, they're not reading JTA, reading, I don't know, New York Jewish Week. Okay, they're not, because they speak French, and some of the younger ones are more in, but. And the same thing in Brazil or in Russia, and obviously there are people who are here and there who are like aggregating this content, and a lot of times illegally, and translating it, etc. But so I agree with you. There isn't a dialogue. Like one of the ideas I had was we need there's no outlet that sees itself as the hub of news for the Jewish world. Like, so you have JTA, but it's an American, an amazing American organization. It's been around for 100 years. I love JTA, but I'm a nerd. And again, like there's no video. If there are photos, it's just like someone sent it in, or like the journalist who was maybe there took a picture, but it's not like, it's not an Instagram photo. It's not, it's not something that's going to become viral. And I feel that we need something that's translated or dubbed, back and forth. My idea was to kind of like, there's, you definitely know there's Khan, the Israeli Broadcasting Network. So their digital is amazing. Actually, my former boss established it, Elad Teneh, who's now at the Prime Minister's office. There's like really interesting videos, and it's like top level of editing, videoing, etc. And I was like, what if we did that for the Jewish world? And we had like freelancers all over the place. Like, there was years ago, like 10 years ago, one of my first stories in the newspaper was about this Ukrainian oligarch, I think, that created this TV station called Jewish News One. Do you remember that? You could Google it. It's interesting. So they actually had these like really nice studios and a news anchor, and they paid these journalists all over the world to be their people, whatever, I don't know what. But that business model just doesn't, existed for a while. But there are people creating content. It's just, you need just the same thing as culture. You need to, like, whether you give them some sort of a stipend or something to kind of push them forward, or pay them for it, centralize it, translate it. It's a lot of money. I don't see how it could be like a business. I may be wrong, but like there needs to be some sort of, because again, as someone that it's exposed to like all this stuff, I'm like, if I had time to translate this, it would be amazing. But it's time, it's money, it's all this stuff where you're like, it's but I think we agree on this.
I want to ask you a little bit about your time as the advisor on Jewish Diaspora Affairs to the Office of the President, which was very recently, just a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What was that experience like, and what are some of the things that you advised based on, your role
Right.
there?
So it was fascinating, actually. It was basically, I was running this joint venture between the president's office and the diaspora ministry and an organization called Gesher. It was basically, there was hundreds or even close to 1,000 influential Israelis, like opinion leaders, who were on these reverse birthright trips, mainly from through Gesher, but also other organizations. And no one was doing any follow-up, or they weren't doing enough follow-up with people on these delegations. So the idea was, let's bring in the president's office. It elevates it. Everything that a president or a prime minister touches is a little bit more, it's considered to be more prestigious. The public sees it more as a I don't know, interesting thing. So we had a lot of events we did there, and at the same time, I was also advising the president. So we did a lot of events and to try and create awareness of diaspora Jewry in Israel. That was one of the things we did, and I did a little bit of speech writing for the president, I advised, for instance, on, let's say, the president's going to France. So what, and there were different events with the Jewish community. So what does the Jewish community want to hear? What don't they want to hear? Like, what can you not say? What cultural, things are important to kind of highlight? Map out these key events, that took place and are important. For instance, like the Argentina Jewish community, like the whole issue of the Amia attacks there, in the Jewish community and the Israeli embassy, like that's the core identity of the Jewish community. So like if you speak to them and you don't mention that, like you're just not connected. So it was also just like a lot of meetings with all these like philanthropists who want to promote programs, because like Israeli president doesn't have a lot of mandate to do stuff, but it's like he's the number one citizen. Everybody wants to collaborate with him. So like if you're approaching someone on behalf of the president's office, doors open up, whether it's celebrities or business people, politicians, like they all want to be involved and to work together. So yeah, and I think actually now we have an amazing president, President Herzog, that I'm actually close with, and I occasionally also advise him. And he's a whole different ball game because President Rivlin, had this thing in his speeches where he explained how he years ago he was in America and he made like a very not smart statement about Reform Jews after visiting us. Like he was overwhelmed. It's fine to be overwhelmed because I am too, but the way he spoke about it was very, very negative. And he says, I don't know, he like re-educated himself and understood as a president, like what of the importance of diaspora Jewry, but President Herzog didn't need that. It's just like, it's part of his DNA. It's part of one of the main cores and pillars that he's trying to promote. He's an energizer bunny. He's just like all over the place. His staff is like, they're trying to keep up with his speed. But so it was definitely an amazing year, and I learned a lot. It was very interesting.
It's interesting just thinking about how, like, who can really create the kind of change and the kind of connections that we want to see between the Israeli Jews and the Jews around the world. It feels to me that it's much bigger than just, for example, the president's office. I'm not sure if the government, by and large, can really, I think behind the scenes, they can do a lot of important work, but in terms of being at the forefront, it feels like maybe it's not either their job or something they can really do, sort of, I don't want to say legally, but more like,
I mean,
they're
yes and no, because like nothing is effective if it's just coming from like the top down, right? Like you need grassroots and you need like initiatives to be coming. And I think actually we've been speaking like very negatively about the relationship, and actually like I see very big changes towards in the dialogue and what Israelis know about diaspora Jews. I mean, there's so many organizations in Israel today. I'm part of like, I was one of these people that established a group called the Jewish Peoplehood Coalition. It was established by the Reut group, and basically like all the Jewish professionals in Israel are in these like 2 WhatsApp groups, and there before COVID there were a lot more events, but it kind of created this like ecosystem of Jewish peoplehood type people in Israel. And that was something, even if like, people were like, wait, is this effective? Is this not? I was like, even just having a WhatsApp group and like putting everyone in the same place is, like if there's a job opportunity, whatever, like it will always be there, right? If there's interesting news, it will be there. So, I mean, that's one example of things that are happening. And like, for instance, all the Israeli youth movements actually have like a peoplehood coordinator, including the Haredi youth movements that promote Jewish diaspora. I actually did a speaking engagement like a month ago for a Haredi youth organization, and they wanted me to come in. And again, I didn't show them a Reform Jewish singer, in a synagogue, and something that I usually do in my speaking engagements, but I spoke about, Reform and conservative Judaism and about the different trends and streams. So like, and I was sure that like I was trying to like not, get anybody mad, and they were just like fine with everything I said. And they thanked me for coming, and I was like, okay, like, I didn't expect that. But I'll give an example. Like there are different organizations like Gesher and others who are trying to promote programs in the education ministry, right? So if in schools Jewish diaspora will be part of some curriculum, then that's the way for the government to affect, right? To make a difference. Then again, right? Like you don't usually like what you learn in school, so maybe it should be informal education. But so there are definitely, it needs to be from both directions, but the government needs to be there, because whether funding or, I mean, Birthright, look at Birthright, right? you could read online like all these protocols of the Knesset committees and the government, I don't know, whatever, like the ministers who spoke about, like, why are we giving millions to these rich American kids, right? No one would say that today. So that you needed like really, you need these like leaders who, didn't care about what the public thought, because you could never get, these really public, definitely not then, but even today, to support, to fully support funding such a program. When Bennett was a minister and he transferred $1 million, I think it was, to the Houston Jewish community after the hurricane, you should have read the comments he got on his Facebook. It was nasty. Like, it wasn't. So, you need to be brave and do things because you think it's right, and know that it won't give you any votes. It actually may take some of your votes.
You mentioned some of the speaking engagements that you do. I understand from you that you do quite a few of them. What are some of the best questions that you get that you're like, wow, I'm glad they threw that one at me?
So it's actually interesting, like, because I was writing for a Hebrew speaking outlet, and because I live in Israel and I have, my kids are very young. So I never, like, in the past few years, I haven't been promoting kind of, international speaking engagements. So most of them I do in Israel. Occasionally it's overseas, and COVID kind of enabled me to just sit here in my room and do it internationally. But I get so many questions, just like, why don't they make Aliyah? Like, why don't they make Aliyah? Or other questions could be.
What's your answer to that question, by the way?
Well, first of all, I say, did you ever make Aliyah? Did you ever immigrate?
Yeah.
Because that's a big deal, and that's a big deal, and that's one thing. Second thing is Aliyah, a right thing for everyone at the moment? Because, like, if you're leaving your sick mother in a home, an old age home, and there's no one from the family to take care of her, so, like, is that okay or not? But also, you need to get a large percentage of Jews don't have a strong enough Jewish identity that this would even be on the table. And also, if we're not talking to them, you're not even creating dialogue. So, like, why would someone want to come visit you? It's not like you're like this welcoming, like, oh, please come and, come for coffee. Because Israelis like hosting people, but, like, it's most of them aren't like helping these Olim get jobs, but also it's not, no one wants to be brainwashed. You just want to have coffee with someone to get to know them. That's how you make a real impact. When I was on Birthright, the kids loved most was Friday night dinners. It was a Mayanot group through Chabad. So through Shabbat dinners at Israeli families, that was the highlight of their trip. It was just having a lunch or a dinner with an Israeli family, meeting their kids, hanging out. They said this, and they called them, like, this is my Israeli family, right? That's what we need. We just need those relationships.
So I want to ask you about that, because there's a few things that jump out to me. One is the strong Jewish identity, and two is the connection to Israel that you described. And so I'm going to throw out an idea. It's definitely it needs to be massaged. What would a world look?
Next meeting.
Sounds good. What would a world look like that allowed diaspora Jews to vote in Israel from abroad? Now, I want to preface it by saying that I'm not saying that diaspora Jews should be able to vote on every single issue in Israel, because there's a lot of issues that are just not relevant to them based on the fact that they don't live here. But, like, to me, I feel that they don't have enough skin in the game. And this idea, like, maybe our parents and grandparents' generation, when Israel was being built, and we were right after the Holocaust, effectively. So there was sort of this obvious skin in the game for Jews around the world to have with Israel, even if they didn't plan on coming to move here. But now that we're a few generations removed from the Holocaust, and the world as we know it is obviously very different, but also the Jewish world is very different,
Right.
and Israel is very different. And Israel is today a very strong, independent country. It's still being built in a way, but it's definitely it's been built
Right.
by and large compared to what it used to be.
It's
So like,
stable. It's not like
right, it's not, the little
doesn't need
brother
help to
that
stand up.
exactly. So like, how do we give, voting is a very strong word, but how do we give more diaspora Jews a skin in the game in Israel?
Right. So I don't know if you're aware of like the previous Knesset, right? We keep on changing them too fast, but there was a Knesset member. Her name is Tila Friedman, and she basically brought up this idea. It was called Chok Chovat Hivatzut. So it was like a law that like forced basically consultation, that the Israeli government or Knesset, whatever the question was, were they promoting it through the government or through the Knesset? But before voting on a law, would have to like speak to this committee of diaspora Jews, and the question was how you would represent them, and that's a whole different ball, a whole different and very complicated discussion. But they wouldn't. This committee wouldn't be able to force anything, but just to be heard. Okay. I remember I tweeted about this. It was on Friday, and Fridays and definitely in Israel on Twitter are like not very popular, but it was one of my most popular tweets. Negatively, unfortunately, like both from right and left, everybody thought it was a really bad idea. I'm extreme. I'm for like some sort of elections or whatever, but one idea could be that I like. For instance, like in France, there's a system where French diaspora they have a certain amount of parliament members that represent them. So there's like Meir Chaviv, he represents Israel and a few other countries, but Israel is like the major, like the big group of immigrants. So there's an election in these countries. At the same time, they vote for their MPs because they're voting according to area, right? Like that's what the system works. So like, and this is like I would say maybe in the past like 10 years or 7 years, I forgot when it started. But so that's an amazing idea. Maybe they're even like I would start with like they're not a real Knesset member. They're like there's 120 Knesset members, and then 6 or 5 or 3 or 2, I don't know what, who represent world Jewry in a certain way, and you have to determine how. Even if they just had the ability to stand on the stage and speak, or speak in committees, have a certain status that would allow them, I don't know, access to not intelligence and security stuff, like access to information and to decision makers. So they could be some sort of like, you could see them as like ambassadors, right? Maybe they're not real Knesset members. They're like, but they should have like a special status where they're not just an average, person. But if, like I wrote this op-ed once about Eric Fingerhut is the president and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America. And when he got the job, I wrote an op-ed saying, if you want to succeed, like these are the 5 ways for you to penetrate Israeli society. I said, you need Eretz Nehederet, as we said, what's it called, Saturday Night Live in Israel, to create a, I don't know, an imitation of you, right? So if we have this like really cute and sweet and smart French guy, right, who's representing the French Jewish community in the Knesset, and he's got like this accent, and maybe he makes a few mistakes in Hebrew or I don't know what, and they make fun of him. So like, obviously I'm not for making fun of immigrants and Olim in general, but he exists. That will make him, that will make diaspora Jewry, and it connects to what we said is about being consistent, right? You need something consistent. You can't just have like a conference once a year and say, okay, that's it, we're connected. You have to work at it. So
No,
What do
that's a
you
good
think of
point.
my idea?
No, I love it. And I think the French comparison is very very aptable because it really sort of it makes sense. I mean, like you said earlier in the podcast that half of the Jews, actually more, live outside of Israel today. And so I think they need to feel that they're being heard. I think many of them want to be heard. And I think it would be wise for the Israeli government to hear them and to do it in a way that makes sense for both sides. I think that skin in the game is everything in life. We know that, right? I mean, it's why people
Right.
care. It's why people act. It's why people listen.
The only problem is that, like, in France, we're talking about French citizens. Here,
Yeah, but that's the point, right? Isn't every Jew around the world a
stakeholder or whatever, right? Like,
well, no, but they could literally become a citizen, right? I
right,
mean, you wrote an article recently that said that a certain percentage of Russian Jews come to Israel, get their passport, get some cash, and then leave. So
right,
anyone can do that. I could have done that.
right,
Anyone can do that. Your parents could have
right.
done that. Like,
There are actually people that think that we should allow, like, some sort of, like, status that's, like, maybe even not a citizen, but like, an associate citizen or something,
right.
like, to any Jew that wants to. And that's like what you're saying, like, it gives them some sort of skin in the game. They're involved. You're involving them, actually. So I mean, I'm not sure what I think about it, but it's an interesting idea.
I think it's doable, and I think it's important because the key word is involved, right? Like, if we as Israelis make an effort to better involve them and to show that we care, and then to take their vote, so to speak, and somehow implement it in places where it makes sense. Obviously, there's a lot of places where it just is irrelevant. But there are places, I mean, there's an entire ministry of diaspora affairs. And there's, foreign affairs, you could argue some of it, touches there, and maybe tourism, and maybe, some of the other aspects of the government. I mean, it's not like we're inventing something new. I'm personally not in favor of adding another government ministry, but
Right. No,
they
you
already
don't need another
exist.
one. You have too
Right.
many. Yeah.
Exactly. So the ones that already exist, are there. And I think that even if it's just the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, even if they can somehow find a way to create again, voting is an easy but also convoluted word,
Right.
some kind of a voting mechanism that says, we care about what you think, we want to know what you think. I think it can have a great effect, because I think two things will happen. One, not everyone will show up, so to speak, from the diaspora, but more people will. I think you'll see rise in Aliyah exponentially, not, like double or triple overnight. And I think you'll see more people just coming to Israel in general, just to visit. And at the very least, maybe going back to some of our early conversations, at the very least, being more plugged into, Israeli media, Israeli
Like,
TV
what's going on?
shows.
Right. What's
Right.
going on is right. Right.
And so, to me, it's only a positive. I guess it has to be sort of marketed and branded in a way that is enticing. We know Israel and Jews in general are not great at marketing and branding, but
Right.
that's a different conversation for a different day. Anyway, Zvika, it's been a really pleasant and enjoyable conversation. Thank you so much for taking the
Nice to meet
time.
you.
Likewise, and best of luck.